Untold History of the United States is what we talked about last time. Now,
again, yeah. It's too long. You haven't seen all 12 chapters.
Yeah. Well, last time we'd only seen 10 chapters. 2 new chapters are out there, prologues. So they cover they cover World War I and the lead up to World War II more, Great Depression, etc. They're now out on Blu-ray. You can download them. The paperback version of the book is also out. And I saw that you got a criticism because it's called Untold History of the United States, and somebody was saying, well, we knew some of that. Really? I mean, so yes, of course, if you know history, you know some of it, but was it highlighted? It certainly wasn't highlighted in a lot of the history that we read in civics class when we were in school, etc. Like, I remember from the first 10 that took us from World War II all the way through to the present. I was telling you earlier, Stalingrad, I knew the importance of that, generally speaking, to World War II. But I didn't know the depth of what had happened there.
And it was the turning point of World War II, no question about it. It was the first time at Moscow they turned back the Germans, but it wasn't the same thing as Stalingrad. That was the Germans threw everything they had at that. General Paulus and his 6th Army. And the Soviets took enormous casualties, civilian and military. Drove them back, took 2.5 months. It was in January of '43 when that happened, finally. And that was exactly the turning point in the war, because from that point on, Churchill and Roosevelt, they knew that things had changed.
History is nuanced and complicated, and so Woodrow Wilson in some ways was headed in the right direction, and then boy does he take a wrong turn, and it's not a black and white issue. As I look at Woodrow Wilson and how we got into World War I feel like it's opportunities lost in a lot of ways. And as watching the whole thing, as you see history unfold before your eyes, American history, world history, constantly the theme I get from Untold History of the United States is opportunity lost.
Yeah, lost is the key word, tragedy. There is the road not taken. And I think the history series is done with love. I mean, the sense that it's a country that I loved very much when I was young, and I have to, at my age, I wonder what the hell happened, But Wilson got sucked into it. Partly, we believe, and we showed it, the Morgan Bank had huge loans out to England, very minor loans to Germany. And though that banking element sucked us in towards the British sector more and more, until Wilson basically run on the ticket of not going into war for his second term in 1916, actually went and was very aggressive in prosecuting the war. We made the difference in World War I.
The moneyed interest is what was fascinating to me.
Yeah, the money.
Because that
getting
drives...
the loan back, getting the money back from England, and when they couldn't pay, we made sure that Germany gave the money to England and France, and they'd give it back to us.
See, for example, I mean, that's the exact perfect example of the untold history, right? Because we were told that, yes, after the World War I, we crushed the Germans too much, right? And that led to a backlash, that led to Hitler, so we knew that part, right? But what we certainly weren't told was that part of the reason we crushed the Germans and demanded so much money from them was because the American bankers had lent the money to the British, and the British wanted it from the Germans since they had won, so they could repay the American bankers. That part we didn't get told. How does that work? That was my curiosity. I mean, they don't go to Wilson and say, hey, we'll give you money, right? I don't imagine. How do the bankers get Wilson to do everything they want, if that's the case?
Well, I'm not sure it works like that. I think that there's pressures, and I think that Wilson was divided because America was half German, so he had a lot of voters there that he couldn't go to war against Germany. He had to provoke it. So we had things like the Lusitania, which was lied about at first, very much like the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. And they said we had no arms on board, but there were arms going to England. One thing after another. Bryant tried to stay out of the war. He was Secretary of State, but Wilson definitely wanted to go in. The Dawes, not the Dawes Committee, in the 1930s, I forgot the name now. Jesus, it's too many facts. But they investigated the profiteering from World War I. It was a huge issue in the United States in 1930s. And they found that these people had profiteered. So there were suggestions about an income tax on the war profiteers of about 98%. Never came to be because at that point we were facing the pressures of fascism in World War II. So the America... unfortunately, we never really dealt with it because people made money in World War II, too, as you know. There was a lot of labor strikes, so there was a lot of issues of money all throughout that war. By the time Hiroshima and Nagasaki rolled around, I mean, this is what we don't learn in school. I mean, there are three things you don't learn. One is that the Japanese economy was devastated by the war. People wanted to surrender. They were starving. The transportation facilities, ports, most everything was destroyed. Number two, that the Japanese wanted to surrender, and Truman knew this. The codes, we'd broken their codes. We knew they were sending cables to the Japanese ambassador in Moscow and saying this and this. They were looking for terms from the Russians or trying to make a deal with them. And three, what people in America don't ever learn is that the Soviets invaded Japan in Manchuria and destroyed the Kwangtung army on August 9, which is when the second bomb was dropped. And the Japanese were terrified of the Russians. That was what scared them, had the most impact on them for surrender, because they'd already been bombed by us to smithereens, so they didn't really know the big difference between an atomic bomb and a firebombing of Tokyo. All these factors that we don't really learn in school, so we're not making informed judgments. But we did not have to use the atomic bomb. We used it because we built it, because we spent a fortune doing it, and we wanted to see if it worked.
A quick aside there, because I want to get back to the moneyed interest, but Truman, after watching the series, came across to me as George W. Bush.
I agree with you totally. We made that illusion because, and that's when I didn't know much of this history either when I was younger. And when Bush said that he admired Truman more than any other president of that previous century, next to Reagan maybe, my alarms went off, and I said, there must be something wrong with Truman.
No, because Truman comes across as a really simple guy, simple-minded, easily swayed by the more conservative right-wing forces in his government.
Anti-Soviet forces.
Right, and wants to prove himself, full of bluster, insecure in reality, is not sure he's up to the job.
Yeah.
So, and you see it in coaches, whether it's football, basketball, you see it in presidents sometimes. People who don't have real inner strength go out of their way to fake strength by attacking, punching, bullying, etc. And you saw that in Truman. I think you see it in George W. Bush. But there was a real labor movement back then, and the country in so many ways was more progressive. And so I felt like whether it was Wilson or ensuing presidents, they had to hold labor back by giving them some of the things that they wanted, even if it wasn't necessarily what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
Whereas like now we don't have that countervailing influence. No. So Obama, who I don't believe is a progressive at all, but doesn't really have anyone on his left that he's got to contend with anyway. No. But he doesn't mean it.
He doesn't seem to respond to that. You know, he talks about, I'm not eavesdropping on you, and we're going to look into this, and he reassures France and he reassures Brazil, but it sounds so hypocritical to me, and I don't think these countries believe him either.
As I watched the whole 12 parts, again, one of the themes that popped out at me, obviously, and I don't know that you intended it, but this is what I got out of it, is that American interests, and as a kid, you think American interest means the interests of the citizens of the United States of America. But what they really meant by American interests was business interests. So then I came to the conclusion at some point, I don't know if it was number 7 or number 8 in the series, that, oh my God, the CIA didn't work for us. And, now what it is an interesting question as well. But certainly back then, it didn't work for us at all. It worked for corporations. Yeah. And then in this prologue, when you go from 1900 to the beginning of World War II, you see Smedley Butler, and he says it, right? So now I'm positive that most people don't know who Smedley Butler is. So tell us who he is and how that relates to this.
He was one of the most decorated Marine general, I think 2 medals of honor, 2 or maybe. And he was in 7 or 8 countries, from China to Nicaragua to Honduras. He was a hero. He fought in these limited battles, but he fought the Boxer Rebellion in 1899. So, and that he woke up one day and he basically started to, he realized that he was serving the interests of Brown Brothers Harriman and Standard Oil of that time, and he started to feel very bad about the treatment that we were handing out to the locals in these countries. And he wrote about it finally, War is a Racket, which is a wonderful book, a slim book. And that's what he said. I ran more. You see, Al Capone's a big shot in the gangster world. He runs 3 counties. I ran about 7 countries. I ran interference for big business. And he very colorful. During the bonus march of 1933, when they were in Washington, when they went in, and the veterans from World War I to get paid, they were broke, they were depressed, they had no jobs, they were a hopeless army, sort of. And Butler helped organize them and made very eloquent demands. They were run out of town by Douglas MacArthur, Doug Patton, and General Eisenhower, who was the aide to MacArthur. But they were run out. That was the first instance of American troops fighting each other on our own home ground since the Civil War.
So as I look at all that, though, I'm worried that FDR was the exception, and that
and Kennedy,
and so money washes over us, and it comes in tides, powerful tides, right? And so I'm worried about our ability to win in the long run, right? Yeah. So from time to time, we get a short burst with Kennedy, we get a very long burst with Roosevelt, and FDR sets it such good rules in motion that it actually lasts for about 40 to 50 years before the Supreme Court says, no, you're allowed to put money in politics, and money is speech, and you can spend unlimited money, et cetera. And then a wide-scale assault on our democracy begins again. But as I look at that, I was growing up, I thought maybe that we had solved it, that democracy could work, right? Yeah. But then here comes this giant tide of money again.
I mean, I do think the world should have ended in 1962, honestly. I think, and it's been substantiated now even by this establishment historian. Dalek has written a new book on Kennedy where, he makes the point of how vicious our military Pentagon was by 1960. It got built up by Truman. It started as national security state, but Eisenhower from 52 to 60 built it up to from 3,000 nuclear weapons to 23,000, and then he went to 30,000 on a budgeting cycle. We were armed to the teeth, and it was a first option. In other words, Eisenhower had said, let's try to use nuclear weapons as a first strike thing so that it doesn't become, we don't have to get into wars. People will be terrified of us. We had so much superiority over the Soviets that when young John Kennedy comes into office, he's facing a mountain. I mean, you have no idea of the odds. And the generals are openly disrespectful of him, and you can see that in this establishment book by Dalek. But they're undercutting him at every chance they get, from the Bay of Pigs to Laos to Vietnam, and of course in Cuba. And Cuba is a big no-no. Kennedy's not stupid. He has character. He fights them, and he fights them from day one. It's not like the last year only. He fights, and it's a losing battle in the end. But he did get us out of a horrible moment in time when we really knew we could win. We could wipe out the Soviet Union, and we could sustain their reaction. In other words, we could take that loss. That's what the Dr. Strangelove thing is about. How many casualties do you have to take? Fear and paranoia really launch us into these buildups, but we had reached a place in 1962 when it was the end of the world. They're saying, take them now. Take them now. We can withstand a retaliation.
Obama and JFK are an interesting contrast, because as you see JFK stand up to the military in Cuba and say, no, we're not going to do that, I was thinking of President Obama and how he largely has not stood up to the military in the same way. So he comes in and says, in the beginning, we're not going to do signature strikes on drone strikes, right? The signature strikes are where we literally have no idea who we're bombing, right? We think maybe there's some activity down there. Robert Greenwald has a new movie coming out, and it shows, and the New York Times wrote about it the other day, 68-year-old grandmother picking vegetables.
I saw it.
Right. But at some point, Obama gives in and says, yep, okay, go ahead, go for it.
I think that he made a deal somewhere along the line. He understood the situation. If you're if you're a president, you have military people and security people always around you. They focus you. Your life is under threat. Our country's under threat. You're always under threat. You have to start thinking along these lines: protection, security, because you can't argue that issue in politics. You can't win.
But one thing is clear: money in politics has, if anything, grown stronger, more systematic, more systemic. So the corruption used to be, hey, I'll give you money or I'll give you a job. Now, you can't get elected unless you take donor money, unless you take money from corporations, you take the PAC money, you take the special interest money. So they have found a way to change the rules so that no one can win unless they have taken a giant amount of legalized bribes.
Yeah. Well, the curve of the ball could break differently. If we have a massive economic tsunami, something of that nature happens, or something happens in the world, and if we suck our resources into another futile, incredibly expensive war, if the weather changes. I mean, there's things that happen that we haven't thought about. Whoever predicted the Berlin Wall would go down peacefully, that Gorbachev would see the madness of this race and say, enough, it doesn't work for our economy. It's not going to work for our economy either. I have a feeling that we are really fucking ourselves in a deep way. I think it's going to come from within. It always does. Empires always fall from within.
You see the CIA doing all these different regime change, is a way of putting it, right?
Or intervention.
In Africa, in the Middle East, in Latin America, sometimes outright coups, sometimes more subtle than that.
Putting money into elections,
Right.
France, Italy, after the war.
Right. And, 1953 in Iran, it was pivotal, changed world history by toppling their democracy so we can, get their oil at more favorable prices for business interests, not American interests.
Right.
The American people never got that oil.
Right.
The American companies got it. And now those companies are no longer American anyway. They're multinational corporations.
Right.
We've built these giant robots, et cetera. But as I saw all of that happening at that period of history, then you see JFK, Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy all killed. And I think, so you're telling me the CIA that did this abroad on a regular basis couldn't possibly do it at home?
Our Indonesian efforts were not known. I think it was Rostow Bundy said that, we should have stopped at Indonesia because we succeeded so much in '65. And it looked like the communists had started it, and I think 1 million communists were slaughtered, It was a tremendous coup inside. They all knew about it. No one knew about it. But they were all talking about Vietnam at that point. And Bundy made the point, and he was a hawk. We should have stopped at Indonesia because that was where the riches are. It's much richer than Vietnam.
So as I see the CIA do decapitation strikes basically on the leaders of those other countries, whether it's Iran, Latin America, Greece, whatever it might be.
Guatemala was a big deal.
Yeah. And I see that the three most progressive leaders that America had that stood up for the American people also, in a sense, get decapitated, and almost literally, right?
Who are the three you're thinking of? You're talking about that?
JFK, RFK.
I can't say
and
about Martin Luther King because I don't know that the CIA was involved in that. I think that there was a tremendous amount of racism that he was up against, as well as he went against the Vietnam War. So he hit on the three monsters: racism, poverty. He won the war on poverty, and militarism.
Well, you see, that's the thing. When he took on race, he wasn't killed yet, right?
Yet.
And poverty, etc. But when he went up against the war, he gets assassinated.
Yeah. Right. I wouldn't go there yet. I would say that with the autopsy and ballistic evidence with Kennedy, no question that there were two shooters at the least, and more than that. But it's also with the Robert Kennedy case, the autopsy and the bullets and the amount of shots heard, the eyewitnesses. It's still amazing to me that we could fall for that bullshit about Sirhan.
Yeah.
Who doesn't? I don't even know he hit him. As far as I know, it wasn't. He was in front of him. But anyway, look. So in the Robert Kennedy case, that's still to be gone. I think a good filmmaker can get in there and do a great story. But JFK, I just cannot. I cannot stand reading establishment press saying that, of course, Oswald is the assassin. They haven't read a book. They haven't even consulted an expert who's really worked at this for 30 years. There's so many of them that are available. They don't take it seriously. That's the arrogance of America. That's our blindness. We are. If you read our media today, and I don't know how disturbed you get about it, we always assume whenever a situation arises that we have to solve it, that we're in charge, that it's what is America's interest here, whether it's Fiji or somewhere in Afghanistan. And it's a strange mentality, a mindset that's come into being in the arrogance of World War II. It's never left us. And I thought a black man might have a different take on it. And I certainly Martin Luther King did, but Obama doesn't live up to that man's character. King was a religious man. He heard it from within. He said the voice of God is on me. He said that, Now you might think he's nuts, he's talking to God, but that's what black preachers had. They had that thing. And he said, I gotta do what's right. It's in my conscience. And he declared war on the U.S. for declaring war on Vietnam because they were fighting colored people over there too.
No, and the thing is, I'm not sure I agree though. That's the, as I watch it, I think, yes, there's some moments like the convention where Truman is picked as vice president instead of Wallace. Yes, curve of the ball. It could have gone differently, and And yes, that led to a certain set of consequences that were monumentally important in American history.
Yeah. Or let's say Stalin dies in '53. Eisenhower is the incoming new president. You know, here's a chance for détente. He's offered the olive branch by the new Soviet leaders. Doesn't take it. John Foster Dulles is his Secretary of State. It takes a wholly hostile attitude, rollback, brinksmanship with the Soviet Union. Don't forget John Kennedy. He was starting to, and then he meets Dallas, and his head is blown off at high noon.
No, but see, those I don't think are curve of the ball, to be honest with you, because I think Eisenhower was going to make that decision. He was selected, he was elected to make that decision, okay? And I think JFK unfortunately met Dallas because of the decisions that he made. So if he had played ball, JFK, and he had done what the generals wanted, he doesn't meet Dallas, right? The wobbly chair, FDR gets elected, and and at that point, if the assassin comes to kill him, but his chair wobbles as he's shooting, and he misses, and he hits the Chicago mayor and kills him instead.
Miami,
right. So now, if FDR is killed right then and there, then we never go in the progressive direction, right? And so, yes, the curve of the ball. Yes, sometimes you get the wobbly chair. Yeah. Sometimes Truman is picked instead of Wallace, but the system tries to eliminate that as much as possible. My main driving force is that we've got to get the money out of politics. We've got to end corporate personhood. We've got to finance elections publicly. If we do that, then we set the train in the right direction as opposed to the wrong direction, and we don't have to wait for luck.
You don't have to be Superman, no?
The forces that are on the side of, corporate interests, et cetera, picked a guy like Roger Ailes, who was Nixon's man in terms of the press and communications, who was with Ronald Reagan, who was with George H.W. Bush, and he goes to head News Corp, or I should say Fox News. That's part of News Corp.
The devil.
Right. And Fox News, on that fateful night, is the first network to say George Bush won the state of Florida, when in fact he had not won the state of Florida.
I see.
And the person that Roger Ailes selected to head their election department, to call the election, was George W. Bush's cousin, first cousin. So they had actually set that train in motion. Yeah. It was not an accident. When that economic collapse happens, and it is going to happen, because there's nothing, as you say, there's nothing Ailes can do, there's nothing any of them can do to stop $1.2 quadrillion worth of derivatives from blowing up. That's what it is. I didn't even know what a quadrillion was. I had to look it up. It's 1,000 trillion. Okay, and there is 1.2 quadrillion worth of derivatives bets. That is a time bomb. It's a financial time bomb that will explode. There is no question about it. And when it does, the Ailes of the world have set a train to come by and say, it was the liberals who did it. And get on board, we got to go further right. And my sense of it is, they got a train coming to take people up and send them to a right-wing, dystopia. And what I want to do is,
you and I can.
What I want to do is, I want to throw them a curveball, and at that pivotal moment, say, no, we're going to go back in the direction of FDR, and we're going to set this thing right. And yes, money will bring in another tsunami at a later date, but we can set it right for maybe 10 years, 20 years, if we're lucky, 50 years, and we can bring the country back in the right direction.